The lights were still on. The sirens had stopped. And for a few hours, Israel thought it had survived another night. Then the taps ran dry. In a single coordinated strike, Iran targeted one of the most critical pieces of civilian infrastructure in the modern Middle East, Israel's national water carrier. The result was immediate, catastrophic, and deliberate. 4 million Israeli civilians woke up with no running water, no drinking supply, no sanitation, no fallback. This was not a military base. This was not a weapons depot. This was the central artery of a nation's water system, the 130-kilometer pipeline network that has carried fresh water from the Sea of Galilee to Israel's cities, farms, and hospitals since 1964. And in one strike, Iran severed it. Let that sink in. The attack represents a dramatic and deeply alarming escalation in the shadow war between Iran and Israel, a conflict that has been building for decades beneath the surface of Middle Eastern geopolitics and has now broken through into something the world cannot look away from. Targeting civilian water infrastructure is not a tactical move. It is a strategic message. And the message is unmistakable: nowhere is safe. International law experts were on record within hours of the strike. The Geneva Conventions are explicit. Attacks on civilian water supplies constitute a war crime under international humanitarian law. Yet the strike was precise, calculated, and clearly pre-planned. This was not a stray missile. This was intelligence-driven targeting of a system that sustains millions of civilian lives. In Washington, the White House convened an emergency national security meeting. In Brussels, NATO ambassadors were called to an unscheduled session. In Moscow and Beijing, statements were carefully worded, neither condemning nor endorsing, but watching with extraordinary attention. And in Tehran, silence. Deliberate, knowing silence. The question now reverberating across every intelligence agency, every war room, and every diplomatic back channel on Earth is not whether this changes the conflict. It already has. The question is whether Israel's response will be measured, or whether the world is watching the opening act of something far larger. Because here is what the headlines are not telling you. Water is not just infrastructure. Water is survival. Striking it is not an act of war in the conventional sense. It is an act of siege. It is a message sent not to a government, not to a military, but to a people, 4 million people, to understand why Iran struck Israel's water grid and why analysts argue this moment was perhaps inevitable. You have to go back. Not days, not months, decades. The conflict between Iran and Israel is not a recent phenomenon born of modern headlines. It is a slow-burning, ideologically rooted, strategically calculated rivalry that has shaped the entire architecture of Middle Eastern geopolitics for nearly half a century. Before the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran and Israel maintained functional, even cooperative relations. Both were aligned under the American security umbrella during the Cold War. Intelligence cooperation existed. Trade existed. A quiet, pragmatic relationship existed. Then came 1979. The Shah fell. Ayatollah Khomeini rose. And within months, the Islamic Republic of Iran declared Israel an illegitimate entity that had no right to exist. The Israeli embassy in Tehran was handed over to the Palestine Liberation Organization. The rupture was total, it was ideological, and it was permanent. From that moment forward, Iran's posture toward Israel was not merely hostile, it was existential. The destruction of the Israeli state became enshrined not just as foreign policy, but as a foundational principle within the framework of the Islamic Republic's ideology. Iran did not immediately confront Israel directly. Instead, it built. Through the 1980s, Tehran funded, armed, and trained Hezbollah in Lebanon, creating a proxy force on Israel's northern border that would eventually become one of the most heavily armed, non-state military organizations in history. Hamas in Gaza followed. Islamic Jihad followed. The architecture of what Iran calls its axis of resistance was constructed brick by brick over 2 decades with deliberate strategic patience. Israel watched, monitored, and periodically struck, conducting operations against Iranian nuclear infrastructure, deploying sophisticated cyber weapons against Iran's centrifuge network in 2010 and conducting hundreds of documented airstrikes against Iranian weapons convoys in Syria throughout the 2010s and early 2020s. The two nations fought a continuous covert war, each side calibrating its actions to stay beneath the threshold of full open conflict. The Hamas attack of October 7th, 2023 changed the geometry of everything. Israel's military response in Gaza triggered a cascading series of escalations across the region. Hezbollah opened a front in the north. Houthi forces in Yemen began targeting Israeli-linked shipping lanes. Iranian-aligned militias in Iraq and Syria launched drone strikes against American and Israeli targets with increasing frequency. And then, in April 2024, Iran crossed a line it had never crossed before. For the first time in the history of the Islamic Republic, Iran launched a direct ballistic missile and drone attack against Israeli territory. The majority of projectiles were intercepted by a coalition of Israeli, American, and allied air defense systems, but the psychological and strategic barrier had been broken. Iran had fired directly at Israel, and both sides had demonstrated something the world needed to understand. The old rules of engagement, the careful, deniable shadow war, were dissolving. In the months that followed, the cycle accelerated. Israeli operations reportedly eliminated several senior Iranian military figures. Tehran promised consequences on multiple occasions through official and semi-official channels. International diplomacy, American-led ceasefire efforts, European back-channel negotiations, Qatari mediation failed to produce a durable pause. Each attempt collapsed under the weight of mutual distrust, domestic political pressures, and the relentless logic of escalation. By early 2025, multiple regional security analysts were publicly assessing that Iran was preparing a fundamentally different category of strike, not another missile barrage. Those had been largely intercepted, their deterrent value diminished. Something different. Something that would bypass layered air defense systems entirely. Something that would hit not a military target, but the foundation of civilian life itself. The national water carrier, analysts now believe, had been identified and studied. The planning, by all available evidence, had begun well in advance. And then, without warning, without declaration, without any diplomatic signal, the strike came. In the early hours of the morning, Israeli air defense systems detected an incoming threat. But this time, the trajectory was different. The signature was different. And by the time the full operational picture became clear to Israeli command, the damage was already done. The target was not a city, not a military installation, not a border crossing or an airfield. The strike tracked directly toward the central pumping infrastructure of Israel's national water carrier, the aging but irreplaceable backbone that moves fresh water from the Sea of Galilee southward through the length of the country. The strike was swift, the damage was extensive, and the consequences, engineers and analysts agree, will take weeks to begin to reverse. According to early assessments consistent with Israeli defense reporting, the attack appears to have been executed using a combination of precision cruise missiles and loitering munitions launched from multiple origin points simultaneously, a tactic specifically designed to saturate and overwhelm layered air defense systems by forcing them to engage threats arriving from multiple vectors at the same time. Israeli defense systems engaged a significant number of the incoming projectiles, but the attack was deliberately architected to ensure that enough got through to achieve the operational objective. Multiple pumping stations along the carrier's northern and central segments sustained direct hits. Water treatment facilities servicing major population centers were among the damaged infrastructure. An Israeli national water emergency was declared across multiple districts within hours of the strike. Iran, consistent with its long-standing doctrine of strategic ambiguity in covert and semi-covert operations, stopped short of an explicit formal claim of responsibility. However, Iranian state media framing was unmistakably celebratory in tone. Senior figures aligned with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps made public statements, carefully constructed to remain technically deniable, characterizing the strike as a response to what they described as Israeli actions against civilian populations. Iranian government communications, assessed by multiple regional intelligence services, including those of Jordan and Saudi Arabia, were consistent with the posture of a state that had conducted the operation and was signaling awareness of it without formally confirming authorship. Weapons debris recovered at strike sites, according to early technical assessments shared with Western partners, showed signatures consistent with Iranian military inventory and inconsistent with the known capabilities of any proxy force operating in the region. The assessment of multiple independent analysts and regional intelligence services points in one direction. This strike came from Iran directly. Again, Israeli emergency response teams reached damaged infrastructure sites within the first hour following the strike. What they found confirmed the worst assessments. The main pumping infrastructure at key sites had sustained direct hits. The computerized control systems, the electronic nervous system that regulates water pressure and flow distribution across the entire network, had been specifically targeted and destroyed. Critically, backup and emergency generation systems had been disabled in what appeared to be deliberate secondary targeting, specifically designed to prevent rapid emergency restoration of service. The level of operational precision involved in this targeting is, by itself, analytically significant. It implies access to detailed technical intelligence about the internal layout and operational architecture of these facilities, intelligence that goes well beyond what commercial satellite imagery could provide. Engineers assessing the damage confirmed that the destruction was not limited to physical structures. The control and monitoring systems, the components with the longest replacement and recalibration timelines, had been the primary focus of the strike. Structural repairs can begin within days, restoring full electronic control infrastructure, sourcing specialized components, and recertifying system integrity across a network of this scale is a process measured in weeks, possibly longer. 3 critical analytical questions remain unresolved and are driving intelligence community assessments in real time. How did the attacking force obtain the level of precision targeting data that this strike required? Were there additional intended targets within a broader operational plan that were successfully intercepted, targets whose destruction would have revealed an even more ambitious strategic objective? And was this strike a standalone escalatory signal from Iran acting independently? Or was it the visible component of a coordinated operational picture involving proxy and allied forces across the region? The answers to those 3 questions will define not only Israel's response, but the trajectory of the entire regional order in the weeks ahead. And Israel, by every available indication, is already preparing to respond.